When I arrived at my sister's engagement party, the security guard sent me to the service entrance. She didn't know I owned the hotel, or that the groom's family was about to learn it the hard way. The ballroom glittered through the service door, polished marble floors reflecting the soft glow of chandeliers. The smell of freshly cut flowers and expensive champagne filled the air. The music, distant and muffled, was the kind of music you could only hear at events like this, soothing, elegant, and slightly too loud for anyone to actually hear each other over. I glanced at the security guard, who barely spared me a second glance, before pointing to the door. "Staff goes that way," he said. His voice was dismissive, like I didn't belong, like I didn't matter. It wasn't the first time I'd been made to feel small, but it stung all the same. My sister, on the other hand, had been practicing for this moment her entire life. To her, this engagement party was everything an opportunity to show the world that she was finally where she belonged. She didn't know I was here. She didn't know I was going to walk through this door with nothing but my old sweatshirt and jeans. She didn't know I'd just spent 3 years building a life she never bothered to ask about. And she definitely didn't know that I owned this place, the very hotel where her so-called fairy tale was being staged. As I stepped into the kitchen, the noise around me shifted. The hum of the kitchen's busy energy buzzed in my ears, blending with the soft clinking of trays and dishes. No one questioned me. No one hesitated when I walked past the staff. It was a strange kind of invisibility that I had perfected over the years. I had learned how to move through life unnoticed, like a shadow. My sister had been different. Growing up, she always stood at the front of the line. She was the one who matched every outfit for family photos, who perfected every smile for the camera, who made sure everything looked just right, even when the rest of us were crumbling on the inside. She was the one our parents invested in, the one they praised for her ambition and poise. I was the one they hoped would find my way, quietly drifting in the background, just trying to keep my head down. I didn't mind. Not at first. But as the years passed, I found myself retreating even further, away from their expectations and the role they had set for me. They never asked about my life, about the projects I worked on, the challenges I overcame, or the ways I had changed. They didn't care that I'd stepped out of the life they expected for me, and so I let them believe whatever they wanted. It was easier that way. I glanced at the banquet staff as they bustled around, their faces painted with a mix of frustration and resignation. My sister's event had been changed 3 times in the last hour, and I could feel the growing tension in the air. As I shuffled past them, I caught the sound of her voice, above the rest, sharp and frantic, directing everyone as if she could control everything. As if this was her moment to prove something to the world. I stayed out of sight, waiting for the right moment to slip through the cracks and into the heart of the spectacle. It wasn't about the party, and it certainly wasn't about the people in it. This was bigger than that. The truth about who I really was, about what I had become, was about to collide with the false image my sister had spent so much time building. The party wasn't the only thing about to unravel. I took a deep breath, pushing open the door to the service elevator. It was time to let them all see what they never expected. I stepped into the hotel's service elevator, the door sliding shut with a quiet thud. The soft hum of the elevator was the only sound, but it felt like the world was holding its breath. It was hard to believe that just moments ago, I'd been treated like an outsider. My sister, the one who always demanded perfection, had no idea what was coming. She didn't know that the very place she was trying so desperately to impress her new in-laws with was mine. The ride was short, the walls of the elevator echoing softly with the sound of my thoughts. I could almost feel the tension in the building like a pressure cooker, waiting for the right moment to explode. I was about to become the catalyst for that explosion. The groom's family had no idea that the woman they'd been sizing up for hours wasn't just another nobody at the party, and my sister. She was about to learn that her carefully constructed world, one built on appearances, was about to be shattered. The elevator dinged as it reached the executive floor, and I stepped out, greeted by the quiet elegance of the space. It smelled faintly of lemon polish, everything spotless and perfectly in order. This floor, this office, was where everything was decided. It was where the truth had been hiding in plain sight. The truth that none of them knew. That I had built a life for myself that didn't rely on anyone's approval, especially not my sister's. I crossed the floor, moving past the sleek, modern furniture, to the wall lined with monitors. It was easy to get lost in this sterile environment, to lose myself in the clean lines and perfect order. I wasn't here to admire the view. I was here to find what I needed. With a few taps, the camera feed lit up in front of me. I scrolled through the views: the ballroom, the kitchen, the service hallways, and finally the audio booth, where I knew something had gone wrong. And there it was, clear as day. The groom's mother, leaning close to a staff member near the audio controls. She slipped something into his palm, a casual exchange. Her lips formed words, but the intent was obvious. She was trying to sabotage the event. The camera caught her gesture towards the microphone, a quick flick of her wrist. I froze for a moment, watching the scene unfold. It was methodical, practiced. This wasn't an accident, it was deliberate. I leaned back in my chair, my fingers hovering over the keyboard as I processed what I had just seen. The pieces started to fall into place. The bribes, the tension, the rushed changes. Everything my sister had worked so hard to control was built on a foundation of lies. The groom's family wasn't as untouchable as they wanted everyone to believe. Their wealth. A house of cards. I turned my attention to another screen, scanning the financial reports. Bills unpaid, mortgages stacking up, liens accumulating. The image of their old money, facade, began to crack, revealing the truth behind the polished surface. They were hanging on by a thread. It wasn't a legacy they were preserving. It was a desperate scramble to hold on to what little they had left. I wasn't surprised, but I couldn't shake the feeling of cold clarity settling in my chest. It was the kind of moment when you realize everything you thought you knew about someone is nothing more than an illusion. And the more I looked at the financial documents, the more I saw how deep their deception ran. This wedding, this party, it wasn't about celebration. It was a desperate last-ditch effort to reset everything, to use my sister as collateral. I stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the city. The hotel's grand facade sparkled in the night, but now it felt hollow, just like the family my sister was about to marry into. This wasn't a fairy tale. This was a performance, one that my sister had been cast in, without even realizing it. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. I wasn't going to let her drown in this false image, not when I could do something about it. I pulled out my phone and made a quick call to the security team. "Get me a copy of the footage from the audio booth," I said, keeping my voice steady. "And pull the event payment records. I need to see everything." As I ended the call, I felt a wave of calm settle over me. I wasn't just going to expose them, I was going to do it professionally. Legally, no one was going to walk away from this unscathed, not when they'd used my sister to cover up their mess. It was time to let the truth take center stage. With one last look at the city skyline, I left the room and headed back to the elevator. Downstairs, the party was still in full swing, but the world had already shifted. I had all the pieces. Now it was time to make my move. The elevator doors slid open, and I stepped back into the noise of the party, though it felt like a world away. The sounds of clinking glasses, muffled laughter, and faint chatter filled the air, but there was a sharpness beneath it all. The tension that had been building all evening was thicker now. It wasn't just the guests trying to navigate the labyrinth of polite conversations. It was the weight of secrets that none of them had realized were just about to come to light. I moved quietly, blending into the background again, just like I always had. The staff didn't give me a second glance. The servers walked by, balancing trays and navigating the busy ballroom, and I followed their rhythm, avoiding the eager eyes of my sister, who was spinning around in her carefully curated world of expectations. She didn't see me. Or maybe she didn't want to. Her voice cut through the din, sharp and demanding. "These flowers are wrong. They're supposed to be peach, not coral." She snapped at the florist, her gaze flicking over the centerpiece like it had personally offended her. She was trying so hard to make everything perfect. Trying so hard to prove something. I could almost hear the desperation in her tone, hidden beneath the polished veneer of someone who wanted to belong to the kind of world where wealth and status were everything. The groom's family, on the other hand, stood nearby, radiating the type of confidence that came only from a lifetime of being in control. They didn't need to speak, just their presence filled the room. The groom's mother moved with purpose, inspecting the floral arrangements with a practiced hand, her eyes critical, as if she were evaluating produce at a market. She was so sure of herself, so accustomed to having her way, that she couldn't imagine a reality where things didn't go according to her plan. I watched her. I watched how she manipulated the staff with the slightest gesture, how she threw glances at the rest of the room, as if they were all beneath her. The groom's father stood behind her, perpetually checking his watch, feigning interest, while secretly waiting for the night to be over. The younger brother, leaning against the bar, smirked as he scanned the room, no doubt on the lookout for someone who could give him more attention. And then there was my sister. She moved between them, fluttering about like a bird in a cage, constantly adjusting, rearranging, making sure everything was just so. It was as if she believed that if she could make the world around her perfect, it would somehow make her perfect too. But it didn't work that way, not for her, not for any of them. I had a job to do, but it wasn't the one everyone thought I was here for. I was supposed to be invisible. But now, with the information I had, that invisibility felt like power. I wasn't going to stay hidden forever. Not this time. I kept my movements casual, blending into the crowd, watching the chaos unfold with a calm I hadn't expected to feel. There was something freeing in knowing I had the upper hand, in knowing the truth that none of them had even begun to scratch the surface of. It wasn't just the wedding that was a facade. It was the entire life they had built on lies. And then, I caught the younger brother's eye. He looked me over, his smirk widening into a grin when he saw I was wearing the service staff's uniform. "So, you working tonight?" he asked, his gaze sliding down to my sweatshirt like it was somehow beneath him. I didn't respond right away. I didn't need to. Instead, I just turned, walking past him without a word. His laugh followed me as I moved deeper into the crowd, the sound of his casual insult hitting me like a slap. "These staff girls get so sensitive," he muttered under his breath. The words lingered in the air, but I didn't let them bother me. I had bigger things to focus on. I could feel the unraveling happening, but I needed more. I needed more than just the tension between the groom's family and my sister. I needed to know how deep the deception ran. I slipped into the kitchen, blending in once again with the staff. The air here was thick with heat and the smell of fresh food. But there was something else too. A sense of defeat. The staff moved quickly, But their movements lacked the usual precision, the usual pride. They were tired, worn down by the constant last-minute changes my sister had demanded. And they weren't even pretending to care anymore. One of the servers sighed as she placed another tray of hors d'oeuvres on the counter. "If she sends this back one more time," she muttered, "I'm quitting." I didn't have to ask to know who she was talking about. It was my sister, the same woman who couldn't stand the thought of anything being less than perfect, even when it wasn't her own hard work that was being put on display. Another voice chimed in from across the room. The groom's mother already complained the champagne was the wrong shade of gold. The staff member's tone was dry, and I could hear the bitterness in her words. It was clear they were done. The night wasn't about celebration anymore. It was about keeping up appearances, no matter the cost. The realization hit me again, stronger now. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a performance. And the people who had been performing for so long, my sister, her in-laws, were about to find out just how fragile their world really was. The sound of the door swinging open interrupted my thoughts. The head chef, usually a pillar of calm amidst the chaos, walked in with a look of pure frustration. "What do you mean the event payment bounced?" he asked, his voice sharp. One of the kitchen staff, pale and shaking, stood by the counter. "I mean there's no money," she said quietly. "The payment came back this afternoon." Bounced. The room went quiet. Even the clatter of pans stopped as everyone absorbed the weight of the words. The truth rippled through the kitchen like a stone dropped in water. My heart didn't race. I didn't feel the rush of adrenaline that should have accompanied such a revelation. No, I felt something else, a quiet certainty. This wasn't a surprise. It was the moment everything I had suspected snapped into focus. I couldn't help but smile, just slightly, as I wiped my hands on the towel. This was it. The truth had already started to undo the perfect illusion they'd been so desperately trying to maintain. They just didn't know it yet. I walked back into the ballroom, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on me. The sharp contrast between the chaos of the party and the calm certainty I felt was almost surreal. The guests were still milling about, their laughter too loud, their conversations too shallow. My sister, still running around trying to perfect every detail, had no idea what was about to happen. The groom's family remained a fixture of polished indifference, but the cracks were starting to show. I could feel it in the air. The tension was palpable. I moved through the crowd, unnoticed, blending in like I belonged, even though my mind was far from the party. I was thinking of the files I'd pulled, the footage I'd seen. I had all the evidence I needed. And now, it was time to use it. I found a quiet corner near the bar, where the younger brother was still standing, leaning against the counter with his usual arrogant smirk. He didn't notice me at first, too busy scanning the room for someone to entertain him. When he did see me, his eyes glinted with that familiar, condescending look. "So, you working tonight?" he asked, his voice dripping with mockery. I didn't answer him. I just kept walking, pretending not to hear. He wasn't worth the response. But his words stayed with me, like a thorn in my side. These staff girls get so sensitive. It was exactly what I expected, just another example of how little they thought of anyone who wasn't in their privileged circle. I pushed past him, my mind already focusing on what came next. The groom's mother was at the center of the room, as always, directing everyone around her with that air of superiority. Her gaze swept over the room, scanning for any imperfection she could fix, any detail she could control. She was so used to having everything go her way. But this time, she wasn't going to get away with it. I watched her as she made her way to the audio booth, her steps purposeful. She leaned in close to the technician, whispering something to him. I couldn't hear the words, but the way she handed him a bill told me everything I needed to know. She was bribing him. I had the footage. I had the proof. This wasn't just a family trying to look good. It was a planned attack on my sister's life. All to maintain an illusion of perfection. I turned away, walking quietly toward the executive floor. My heart didn't race. It was calm, steady. I had everything I needed. There was no more pretending. No more playing by their rules. I was going to expose them, every last one of them. As I stepped into the elevator, the doors closed behind me with a soft chime. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. This was the moment when everything would change. No one would be able to hide behind their lies anymore. The elevator ride felt longer than it should have, the hum of the machinery beneath my feet, somehow louder than the sounds of the party far below. I had a plan, but I needed one more thing. My sister's face when she realized everything. She thought was real was nothing but a house of cards. I stepped out onto the executive floor, the silence of the area almost deafening after the chaos of the ballroom. I moved quickly to the control room, where the monitors were already displaying the feeds from the various cameras in the building. One by one, I reviewed the footage: the ballroom, the kitchen, the staff corridors, and then I found it clear as day. The groom's mother, leaning in close to the audio technician, slipping something into his hand. The bill. The instructions. The sabotage. I couldn't help the small smile that tugged at my lips. She thought she had control. She thought she could manipulate everything. But I was the one who held the power now. I switched to another screen, pulling up the financial records. Bills unpaid. Mortgages overdue. Liens stacking up like forgotten paperwork. This was the truth. This was the reality behind their false facade of wealth. The so-called old money wasn't old at all, it was crumbling. And my sister had been caught in the middle of it all, blindly chasing a dream that was never meant to be hers. I stood in front of the screen for a moment, letting it all sink in. This wasn't just about exposing them. It was about giving my sister a chance to see things for what they truly were. It was about opening her eyes to the fact that she didn't have to live up to their expectations, that she didn't have to sacrifice her own happiness to please them. I took a deep breath, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. This wasn't going to be easy, but it was necessary. I wasn't just going to confront them. I was going to do it with grace, with professionalism. No chaos. Just the truth. I made the call. The general manager would be waiting for my signal. The moment to expose everything had arrived. And with that, I turned back toward the elevator. There was no going back now. The truth was in motion, and the facade they'd built was about to crumble. I took a moment to steady myself before stepping back into the ballroom. The door opened with a soft creak, and the noise hit me like a wall of sound: laughing guests, clinking glasses, the faint thud of music. But now, all I could hear was the pounding in my chest. I wasn't nervous, though. I was ready. Ready to bring everything to light, to expose the truth that had been hiding in the shadows. I could see my sister from across the room, flitting between guests, trying to keep everything perfect, as always. She was running herself ragged, unaware of what was unfolding. Her smile, that practiced, flawless smile, was pasted on her face, a mask of the perfect bride-to-be. She had no idea how much she was being used, how much of this was a lie, and how close she was to losing everything she had been working for. I walked past the crowd, unnoticed, just another invisible person in a sea of faces. The groom's family stood off to the side, their presence imposing as always. His mother, the queen bee of the evening, stood at the center of it all. I watched her glance over the room, her eyes scanning for any imperfections, any cracks in her perfect world. She had orchestrated this night with a single purpose: to maintain control. She didn't care about my sister's happiness. She cared about keeping up the image of wealth, of success. I approached the bar, my pulse steady, my mind focused. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me, but there was no turning back now. The younger brother was still there, leaning casually against the bar, his eyes flicking over the room. He noticed me almost immediately, that familiar smirk crossing his face. "So, you working tonight?" he asked, his voice dripping with mockery. I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. Instead, I walked right past him, my steps deliberate, as if I belonged there. He called after me, but I ignored him, just like I had been ignoring them all for years. I wasn't here to play their game anymore. This wasn't about them. It was about my sister, and the truth she needed to see. As I moved further into the room, I spotted the groom's mother again. She was still controlling the flow of the evening, still trying to make everything fit into her perfect vision. But something was different now. She had no idea that everything she'd worked so hard to control was about to come undone. She didn't know that her carefully constructed world was already crumbling around her. I found a quiet corner near the catering station, out of sight but close enough to hear everything. My sister was in the thick of it, still fussing over the details. She was adjusting the flower arrangements for the third time, muttering under her breath about the linens, the champagne, the lighting. Nothing was ever right. She couldn't see the bigger picture, the way she was being used, the way her life had been shaped by other people's expectations. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. This wasn't just about the party. It wasn't just about her wedding. It was about everything she had been chasing for years, and how it was all built on an illusion. She thought she was marrying into a legacy, but the truth was far from that. I couldn't help but feel a pang of pity for her, even as I steeled myself for what was coming next. She didn't know the truth about the groom's family, about the way they had been manipulating her. She didn't know that they were about to be exposed for who they really were. But I wasn't going to let her be a pawn in their game anymore. The general manager entered the ballroom, a man of few words, but his expression told me everything I needed to know. He was ready. I gave him a nod from across the room, and he made his way toward me. The moment had arrived. He stopped in front of me, his hands holding a folder with the weight of the world inside. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. He was here to do exactly what I'd asked. I was in control now. My sister turned, noticing the interaction between us for the first time. Her brow furrowed, confusion written across her face. She started to walk toward us, ready to step in with one of her usual rehearsed smiles. But I wasn't going to let her. "Not this time, Miss Lane," the general manager said, his voice carrying across the room. A hush fell over the crowd, the murmurs dying instantly. My sister froze. Her smile faltered as she watched the scene unfold before her. The groom's mother tensed, her eyes darting between me and the general manager. She knew something was wrong, but she couldn't yet grasp the magnitude of it. The general manager handed me the folder. I took it slowly, almost deliberately, making sure everyone saw the exchange. My sister's eyes were wide now, her gaze flicking between me and the groom's family. The silence was deafening. I opened the folder, my fingers steady as I pulled out the first piece of evidence. I didn't need to explain it. I didn't need to say anything. I just showed everyone the truth. The first image that flashed across the screen was the groom's mother, leaning into the audio booth, her hand slipping money into the technician's palm. The room gasped. I looked at my sister, her face pale, her breath caught in her throat. "She tried to sabotage the event," I said, my voice steady but firm, "to make sure everything went her way. But it wasn't just this. Look at the next one." I tapped the screen again, and another image appeared. It was a financial report, overdue bills, lions, Foreclosures. The groom's family wasn't who they claimed to be. They were drowning in debt, barely holding on to their wealth with borrowed time. My sister's hands trembled as she reached out to steady herself against the table. "This is the truth," I said, letting the weight of it hang in the air. "This wedding wasn't about love. It was about using you to reset their own financial mess. They don't care about you. They care about control." My sister stumbled back, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I tried," I said softly. "But you never listened. You were too busy trying to fit into their world to see what was right in front of you." The room buzzed with whispers now. People shocked and appalled by what had just been revealed. The groom's mother, finally realizing her carefully constructed image was falling apart, made a move to speak, but I cut her off. "This isn't about you choosing sides," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. "This is about choosing the truth. The real truth." The groom's mother glared at me, her face turning red with anger, but she didn't say a word. Her husband tugged at her arm, urging her to leave. Without a word, she turned, and the family followed her out of the ballroom, defeated and exposed. The silence that followed was almost deafening. My sister stood there, trembling, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and confusion. She turned to the groom, who stepped toward her with tears in his eyes. "I don't care about the money," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I care about you. I want to build a life with you on our own terms, not theirs." My sister collapsed into his arms, her tears flowing freely now. And as she cried, I felt something shift inside me too. We weren't just uncovering lies. We were breaking free. I stepped forward, wrapping my arms around both of them. "You're not alone," I whispered. "You never have to be." And in that moment, I knew I had done what I needed to do. Not for revenge, not for vindication, but for the truth. I stood in the silence that followed, watching as my sister clung to her fiancé, her body shaking with the weight of the truth I had just dropped on her. She had been lost in the idea of a perfect life, a life built on the illusion of wealth and status. And now, with everything stripped away, I could see her real struggle. The room was still. Guests whispered among themselves, too shocked to speak up, too uncertain to know how to react. It was almost too quiet. Even the clinking of glasses had stopped. I stood there for a moment, watching the aftermath of my revelation sink in. My sister's fiancé held her tightly, his hands gentle on her back as she tried to steady herself. The tears were flowing freely now, and I could hear her quietly sobbing into his chest. The groom, so poised and confident moments ago, was now a shell of that man. His face was pale, his mouth slightly agape, as if he couldn't fully process what had just happened. I had never seen him so vulnerable, and for the first time, I wondered whether he had been just as blinded by his family's image as my sister had been. But that didn't matter now. What mattered was the truth, and my sister's ability to face it, to confront the life she had been sold, the life she had fought for, thinking it was everything she needed. I stepped closer to them, wanting to give them both the space they needed, but also feeling a pull. A responsibility. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, my voice soft but firm. "But you needed to know. You deserve better than this." She pulled back from her fiancé, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I can't believe this is happening," she whispered. "I thought I had everything figured out. I thought this was the life I wanted." "You didn't want this," I said, taking a step closer, reaching out to place a hand on her shoulder. "You were chasing a dream that was never yours to begin with. You've been living for their approval, for their idea of what you should be. And now it's time to choose what you want." She shook her head, still processing, still trying to piece together the mess of emotions swirling inside her. I don't know how to do this, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I've spent my whole life trying to fit into something that wasn't meant for me, and now everything's falling apart. Not everything, I said, my voice more confident now. What you build from here, that's yours. The future, the life you want, it's all yours. You don't have to follow their rules anymore. She looked up at me then, her eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in a long time: hope. Real hope. Not the kind that came from trying to impress anyone else. I don't know where to start, she whispered, more to herself than to me. Start with something small, I said, giving her a small smile. Start with something that's just yours. Something you can control. It's not going to be easy, but it'll be real. And that's worth more than all the gold in the world. She nodded, her expression softening as she took in my words. I think I want that, she said, a small but genuine smile breaking through the tears. I think I want to start over. I don't know how yet, but I'll figure it out. I stepped back and glanced at the room, the guests still standing awkwardly, unsure how to move forward. The groom's family had already left, their shame hanging in the air like a thick fog. The evening, which had started as a performance of wealth and perfection, had come to an end, but it was not the end for my sister and her fiancé. It was just the beginning. Take a deep breath, I said to her, stepping back and giving her the space to breathe. You don't have to do this alone. You've got people who care about you. And you've got the strength to make it through. The music in the background had softened, and for the first time all night, it didn't feel forced. The sound was less of a distraction, and more like a quiet reminder that life, real life, was still unfolding around us. It was going to be okay. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. I'll be right here, I added, my voice firm with conviction. Whatever you need, I'm here. She took a long breath and stood taller, her hand gripping her fiancé's. For the first time that night, I saw her with new eyes. She wasn't the perfect daughter, the perfect bride, or the perfect picture. She was just herself, and that was more than enough. Thank you, she said, her voice shaky but stronger than before. For helping me see what I couldn't. I was so caught up in everything else, I forgot what really matters. You're welcome, I said softly. But now, you get to decide what really matters. I turned toward the door, my heart lighter than it had been in years. The ballroom was slowly emptying, the guests trickling out, leaving behind the shattered remains of a night that was supposed to be perfect. But perfection had never been the point. The point was that we could always rebuild. I stopped at the door, looking back over my shoulder. Start from the ground up, I said, feeling the weight of the moment. And don't ever look back. She nodded, her hands still entwined with his, both of them facing an uncertain but hopeful future. And as I stepped out into the night, I knew that, for once, everything was as it should be. The truth had been told, and now, it was time to live it. The next morning, everything felt different. The hotel was quieter now, with only a handful of staff moving around in the early hours. The event had ended, but the repercussions of what had happened still lingered in the air, like the echo of a storm passing through. I walked through the corridors, past the rooms and offices, and found myself back in the kitchen, where it had all started. The space was bustling as usual, but there was a shift now. The staff seemed lighter, their usual tension replaced by a quiet sense of relief. The truth had been revealed, and the pressure had lifted. I found my sister in the hallway, standing near the service entrance. Just as I had once entered the hotel. She was wearing simple clothes now, nothing like the elaborate dress she had worn the night before. It felt like a completely different person was standing before me. She turned as she heard my footsteps, a soft smile creeping onto her face. It wasn't the forced smile I had seen last night. It was real. "I came by to ask where I should start," she said, her voice still a little shaky but stronger than I had ever heard it. I think I want to learn what's real now." I looked at her, my heart swelling. The girl standing before me was no longer the one chasing after the approval of others. She was the woman who had learned to stand on her own, to see the truth for what it was. "Start with something small," I said softly. "Something you can control. Take it one step at a time. But whatever you do, don't let them pull you back into their world. Build your own." She nodded, her eyes bright with determination. "I will. I don't know how to do it all yet, but I'm not going to keep pretending anymore." It was a quiet victory, one that didn't need to be announced. She had already started her journey. This new path was already unfolding in front of her, step by step. I walked with her as we moved through the hotel, the stillness of the morning hanging in the air. The hustle of the day before had died down, leaving behind a sense of calm. It felt like everything had shifted, not just for my sister, but for me as well. I had never imagined this day would come, but I was finally seeing her as the person she was meant to be, not the person others had tried to shape her into. As we reached the service area, I paused for a moment. My sister looked at me, a question in her eyes. I could see the uncertainty in her expression, but also the resolve. "I'll start here," she said, motioning to the housekeeping station. "And I'll work my way up." I smiled. "That's exactly how you'll find your way back to yourself. It's all yours from here." She didn't argue. There was no more hesitation, no more fear of being seen for who she really was. She was ready to begin again, ready to embrace the real world she had been so afraid of before, the one that didn't depend on appearances, but on honesty, hard work, and self-respect. I watched her for a moment longer, her figure blending into the staff area, and felt a quiet pride in my chest. This was what she needed. Not the life she had tried to force herself into, but something of her own making. I wasn't sure what the future held for her, but I knew one thing: it would be hers to decide. The next few weeks went by quickly. My sister, along with her fiancé, began to rebuild their lives. They moved into a modest apartment in the city, away from the expectations and the illusions. They learned how to budget their money, how to shop without splurging on things they didn't need, and how to laugh at their burned dinners. It was a slow, humbling process, but it was theirs. Meanwhile, I watched from a distance, quietly supporting them. I didn't need to interfere anymore. They had found their footing. My sister had begun to work in housekeeping, learning the ins and outs of the hotel business from the ground up. She was gaining respect, not because of the name she carried, but because of the work she was putting in. Her fiancé, who had once been just as blinded by his family's wealth, took on a role in the accounting department, determined to face the financial problems his family had tried so hard to hide. As for the groom's family, their world came crashing down in the weeks that followed. The estate, once a symbol of old money, fell into foreclosure. The family was forced to move south, leaving behind the glittering facade they had tried so desperately to maintain. They tried to play the victim, but no one was buying it anymore. Their lies had been exposed, and they had nowhere to hide. 1 year later, my sister married again, this time in a small ceremony in the hotel garden. There were no chandeliers, no over-the-top decorations, just sunlight streaming through the trees, a few close friends, and a promise built on something real. She walked through the service entrance on purpose that day, smiling as she stepped into the future she had chosen. The path had been difficult, but it was hers. I stood at the back, watching her, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. She wasn't pretending anymore. She wasn't trying to fit into someone else's life. She was living her own. And for the first time in a long time, I felt that everything was finally right. The day of the wedding came, and as I stood at the back of the hotel garden, watching my sister walk down the makeshift aisle, something shifted inside me. The soft sunlight filtered through the trees, casting gentle shadows across the small gathering of friends and family who had gathered for this moment. There were no chandeliers, no grand displays of wealth or perfection, just sunlight and simplicity. It was exactly what my sister needed, exactly what she had been searching for all along. She was dressed in a simple white dress, one she had picked out herself. It wasn't the most expensive thing in the world, but it was hers, and that made all the difference. She walked with a quiet confidence now, not the frantic, unsure steps of the woman who had entered this hotel a year ago, lost in a dream that wasn't hers to chase. Her fiancé stood at the altar, waiting for her, his face full of emotion. I could see it in his eyes. He was looking at her like she was everything. And for once, I wasn't worried. I wasn't worried about her being caught up in the image of a perfect life. She was living her truth now. She was building something real with him. Something that was based on love, not appearances. I couldn't help but feel proud of her. I watched as she reached the altar, her hand slipping into her fiancé's, her face glowing with something genuine. It was a soft smile, one that spoke of peace and acceptance, of knowing who you are and not needing to prove it to anyone else. She didn't need to live up to their expectations anymore. She didn't need to chase their approval. She was living for herself now. And that made all the difference. "I do," she whispered when it was time to say the vows. Her voice was clear, steady, filled with certainty. "I do," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. As they exchanged their vows, I felt the weight of everything that had happened. The lies, the illusions, the chaos of the past year, finally start to settle. It had all led to this moment. My sister wasn't the same person she had been. She wasn't the girl trying to prove her worth through others. She had found herself, and that was all that mattered. The ceremony was brief, but it was perfect in its own way. Simple, honest, and real. There was no performance here, no polished mask to hide behind. They were just two people, in love, choosing each other. As they exchanged the rings, the air felt lighter, almost like the weight of the past had been lifted. They kissed softly, the sound of applause rising around them, but it wasn't for show. It was for the real connection they had found, for the life they were beginning to build together. When it was over, I stood off to the side, letting the newlyweds have their moment. I wasn't the center of attention here, and that was how it should be. I had done my part. I had helped her see the truth. She had found her own path, and now it was time for her to walk it. I watched as she and her fiancé walked away from the altar, hand in hand. There was no grand exit, no elaborate celebration. Just two people, walking toward a future that was built on honesty, trust, and love. It was a future they had chosen for themselves, not the one their families had dreamed up for them. And as I watched them, I felt something settle inside me. Something that had been restless for so long. I was proud of her, proud of them both. But more than that, I felt a sense of peace. A peace that came from knowing that the truth had been revealed, and that my sister had finally found her way. Not in the image of others, but in the life she was ready to create. The guests began to mingle, their conversations softening as they shared their congratulations. There was a quiet sense of joy in the air now, a joy that didn't come from fake smiles or pretentious displays, but from something real, something that had been missing for so long. I felt a tap on my shoulder and turned to find my sister standing there, her eyes bright, a soft smile on her face. She didn't look like the woman who had walked into that engagement party a year ago, unsure of herself and caught in a world of illusions. She looked like herself. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet but sincere. "I couldn't have done this without you." I shook my head, a small smile playing on my lips. "You did it all yourself," I said softly. "I just helped you see it." She nodded, her gaze softening. "I know. I didn't see it before." I reached out and hugged her tightly, feeling the weight of everything lift away. "It's okay," I whispered. "You see it now. And that's all that matters." We stood there for a moment, just holding each other, letting the day unfold around us. The sound of laughter, the soft clinking of glasses, the quiet hum of the evening, it all felt right. It wasn't about the perfect wedding or the perfect family anymore. It was about finding the truth, about choosing a life that was real. And as the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the garden, I knew that my sister was walking into her future, not as someone trying to fit into a mold, but as someone who had finally found her own. And that was more than enough. For the first time in a long time, everything felt right.